and there was ABBA everywhere. I don't know how that happened. But then we said, yeah, but what you know what we should do? We should write a pop song in English and see what happens.
Under the glitter, there was grief. Under the music, there was heartbreak. And behind one of the world's most successful bands stood a man who spent decades hiding the truth. At 78, Benny Andersson has finally broken his silence. Not just about ABBA's split, but about her, the woman who once stood beside him on the world's biggest stages and then disappeared from his life. For years, fans believed their story ended in divorce and distance, but what Benny revealed at ABBA's recent Voyage anniversary left everyone speechless. After 40 years of silence, he spoke softly into the microphone, and what he said about Frida changed how millions now see ABBA. This was a confession, one wrapped in music, regret, and something that never truly died, because behind Dancing Queen, Waterloo, and The Winner Takes It All, there was always another song, one that Benny never released. And now, for the first time, he's ready to tell the world why. Long before the sequins and spotlights, Benny Andersson was just a quiet boy growing up in a modest Stockholm apartment. His father worked for the city, his mother kept the household warm, and music drifted through every corner of their home. At only 6 years old, his father and grandfather placed a small accordion in his hands, an instrument that would shape his entire destiny. They played Swedish folk tunes at family gatherings, and Benny absorbed every note, watching how melody could change a room. Within months, he was experimenting, twisting old songs into new ones, fascinated by the idea that emotion could live inside rhythm. By 10, he had convinced his parents to buy him a piano. There were no formal lessons, no expensive teachers, just endless afternoons pressing keys until sound turned into structure. He studied records by Elvis Presley and Caterina Valente, mesmerized by the contrast between American rock and European elegance. His favorite song was Treat Me Nice, tucked on the flip side of Jailhouse Rock. What caught him was the piano line. Simple yet powerful, something he could feel in his fingertips. From that moment, Benny stopped copying and started creating. School quickly lost his attention. While other teenagers planned careers, he spent nights sneaking into youth clubs, offering to play piano for whoever would sing. His natural ear made him a local sensation. People whispered that he could hear a song once and replay it perfectly. Around this time, he met Christina Grönvall, a young singer with a sharp wit and an even sharper dream. Together they formed a small act, performing at local halls and coffee houses, eventually joining a band with the tongue-in-cheek name Elverkut Spelmanslag, the electric company folk band. The name was a joke, but the music was serious. Here Benny learned arrangement, rhythm, and collaboration, skills that would later turn pop melodies into global anthems. By 15, he'd left school completely, chasing gigs across Sweden. Christina became not only his stage partner, but the mother of his 2 children, Peter and Helene, born before Benny turned 20. Life was moving fast, too fast for a boy who just wanted to make songs, but his determination never wavered. He spent hours perfecting chords, teaching himself how to blend folk warmth with modern energy. There was no plan, no record label, just a young man convinced that music would somehow take him somewhere. He did not know it yet, but the songs he was sketching on worn-out paper would one day echo across stadiums. And soon, one unexpected phone call would change everything, launching Benny from Sweden's smoky club circuit into the whirlwind of fame that would make him a household name. In 1964, Benny Andersson's life changed with one invitation. He was asked to join a rising Swedish band called the Hepstars, a group that would soon be labeled the Swedish Beatles. For a 17-year-old boy who taught himself music by ear, it felt like destiny. Within months, he was behind a gleaming keyboard under flashing stage lights, his melodies carrying over screaming fans who packed dance halls across Scandinavia. Girls fainted at their concerts, newspapers covered their every move, and Benny suddenly found himself living a life he'd never even imagined. Interviews, photo shoots, fame, and the dizzying chaos of the 1960s pop explosion. Even in the madness, Benny was different. While the other members enjoyed the wild parties and flashing cameras, he spent his nights tinkering with chords and melodies, more fascinated by the structure of a song than the applause. He wanted to create, not just perform. When he wrote his first few songs for the group, the results were electric. Tracks like No Response, Sunny Girl, and Wedding carried a sophistication rare in pop music at the time. Suddenly, Benny was the band's creative engine. Swedish radio stations played his songs non-stop, and fans began calling him the quiet genius of the group. Behind the fame, life was complicated. His relationship with Christina, the mother of his 2 young children, was under strain. The constant touring, the endless nights, and Benny's growing obsession with songwriting left little room for family. He loved his children deeply, but music consumed him. It was becoming clear that his heart belonged to the piano more than to anything else. Still, his ambition pushed him forward. In June 1966, fate intervened when Benny met Björn Ulvaeus, a fellow musician from another Swedish band, the Hootenanny Singers. The two connected instantly. They were different in personality. Björn was structured and lyrical, Benny spontaneous and melodic, but together they found perfect balance. They began writing songs for fun, their first being Isn't It Easy to Say. It was natural. Each session sparked more creativity, and what started as a casual friendship soon became a partnership destined to define pop music for generations. By the end of the decade, Benny had outgrown the teenage idol image. He was no longer satisfied with screaming fans or chart-topping singles. He wanted depth, something timeless. The Hep stars were fading, but Benny's musical fire was just starting to burn brighter. He was searching for a new sound, a new collaboration, and perhaps without realizing it, a new kind of love that would change his life both on and off stage. Because soon, a single meeting at a Swedish song festival would introduce Benny to someone who would alter the course of his heart and his music forever. In 1969, a Swedish song festival changed Benny Andersson's life in more ways than one. That was the year he met Frida Lindstad, a fiery young singer whose presence could light up a room before she even opened her mouth. She had a voice filled with warmth and heartbreak, and when Benny saw her perform, he was instantly captivated. Their connection was magnetic, 2 musicians who understood each other without needing words. Before long, they were falling in love. At the same time, Benny's creative partner Björn Ulvaeus met another young singer, Agnetha Fältskog, a rising pop star in her own right. Within months, the 4 of them, 2 men obsessed with songwriting and 2 women with extraordinary voices, found themselves not only romantically linked, but artistically intertwined. The chemistry between them was undeniable, both on stage and off. When they sang together for the first time during a casual trip to Cyprus in 1970, something magical happened. It was supposed to be a fun performance for a group of United Nations soldiers, but their harmonies blended so perfectly that even the soldiers fell silent, realizing they were witnessing something extraordinary. That impromptu concert became the seed of what would later grow into ABBA. Over the next few years, the 4 began working closely, recording background vocals for each other's projects and performing together under playful names like Festfolk, which loosely translated to party people but also hinted at engaged couples. Their first real breakthrough came with the song Voyage, Gamle Man, which showcased the unique power of combining 2 male songwriters with 2 female vocalists. It reached number 5 on the Swedish charts and gave them their first taste of shared success. By 1972, their collaborations were getting serious. Under the guidance of their manager Stig Andersson, Benny and Björn started focusing on international appeal. Their early single People Need Love was credited to Björn and Benny, Agnetha and Annie Fried, a name that was as long as the song's title, but it worked. It reached the Swedish charts and even gained minor traction in the US, proving they were ready for a global audience. Behind the scenes, Benny and Frida's relationship deepened. Music brought them together, but their bond was more than professional. It was emotional, romantic, and at times fragile. They moved in together, spending endless nights experimenting with melodies while the others joined in harmonies that would later define a generation. Yet no one could have predicted that these 2 couples, who once sang about love, would one day pour their heartbreak into songs that made millions cry. By 1973, the 4 knew they had something no one else in Sweden or anywhere had. They just needed a name. Stig Andersson noticed how neatly their initials fit together. Agnetha, Björn, Benny, Annie Fried. ABBA. Simple, memorable, legendary. And with that, a new chapter in pop history began. But as the new name was stamped on their first big single, Ring Ring, Something far bigger than fame was quietly forming behind the microphones. A hidden tension between love and ambition that would one day define their rise and their fall. By 1973, the four musicians who would become ABBA were still just Björn and Benny, Agnetha and Frida, a name far too long for the global fame waiting just ahead. Their single Ring Ring swept through Sweden with its bright hooks and layered harmonies. Although it only reached third place at Melodifestivalen, it became a continental hit and introduced a sound that was lighter, sharper, and more sophisticated than typical pop. The song's glossy production, built on Benny's piano and Björn's guitar, hinted at something new, a Scandinavian take on the wall of sound that could rival anything coming out of London or Los Angeles. Success brought expectation, and expectation brought pressure. Stig Andersson pushed them to return to Melodifestivalen with a song that could win not just Sweden's vote, but the world's. Benny spent sleepless nights at his piano, while Frida made coffee in the next room, listening as fragments of melodies floated through the air. Out of those nights came Waterloo. The song was bold, colorful, and theatrical, a perfect storm of glam rock energy and pure pop joy. When they walked onto the Eurovision stage in Brighton on April 6, 1974, dressed in glitter and satin boots, they looked like a flash from another planet. And when Benny's opening piano chords hit, history was made. ABBA won Eurovision by a landslide. Within weeks, Waterloo topped charts across Europe and even cracked the American top 10. Reporters described the group as the Swedish Invasion, a title Benny found amusing but quietly thrilling. They'd achieved what few European acts ever had, breaking language and cultural barriers through pure melody. Yet behind the celebration, Benny's mind was already racing. He knew one hit would not be enough. He needed to prove they were not a one-song wonder. The next few years became a whirlwind. They toured relentlessly, juggling fame with fragile relationships that were beginning to show strain. The spotlight was bright, but so was the heat that came with it. Critics dismissed them as a novelty act, while fans screamed for more. Benny kept writing. Soes, Mamma Mia, and Fernando followed one after another, turning doubt into dominance. The music industry could not ignore them anymore. ABBA had become an unstoppable machine of melody. Still, for Benny, the glory felt strangely personal. He was not chasing headlines. He was chasing perfection. He spent endless hours in studios fine-tuning harmonies, searching for that emotional spark that made a pop song feel eternal. Fame was thrilling, but exhausting. And while the crowds grew louder, the quiet moments between the four of them began to fade. By the time Dancing Queen was released, Benny had reached the top of the world, but he could already feel the cracks forming beneath it. Love, music, and ambition had built ABBA's empire, yet those same forces were about to tear it apart. The mid-1970s were ABBA's reign, and Benny Andersson stood at the center of it all. Between 1975 and 1980, the band became a global phenomenon. Their sound was everywhere: radios, discos, weddings, even political rallies. With songs like Fernando, Knowing Me, Knowing You, Money, 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 and Dancing Queen, ABBA did not just dominate charts, they defined an era. Yet for Benny, every success came with an invisible weight. The more perfect the harmonies became, the more fragile the people behind them grew. ABBA had started as two happy couples, but fame has a way of magnifying everything: the highs, the flaws, and especially the distance. Björn and Agnetha's marriage, once a symbol of pop perfection, began to unravel. Endless tours, studio sessions, and tabloid pressure made it nearly impossible to live a normal life. When they finally announced their split in 1979, the world gasped, and Benny felt the ripple through the band's dynamic. Suddenly, every love song they performed carried double meaning. Then came The Winner Takes It All. Björn wrote it, but Benny arranged it, and Agnetha sang it like she was bleeding. Fans thought it was just another heartbreak anthem, but everyone close to them knew it was real. Every line dripped with unspoken pain, turning personal loss into universal truth. For Benny, it hit closer than he admitted. His own relationship with Frida was quietly fracturing under the same weight. They had married in 1978, in what looked like a fairy tale moment. The two lovers who'd met through music, now husband and wife at the height of global fame. But success is a strange companion. Benny became more withdrawn, pouring himself into the studio while Frida tried to keep their marriage alive through long tours and lonely hotel rooms. By 1980, the distance between them was not just emotional, it was visible. They stopped arriving at events together, avoided interviews about their marriage, and began living parallel lives. When Super Trooper hit #1 in 1980, ABBA's glow looked as strong as ever. But behind the scenes, it was their last burst of light before the fade. Frida later admitted that by then, she could sense the end of both her marriage and the group. "We simply grew out of each other," she said years later. There were tears, but there was no way back. Benny's heart broke quietly, without scandal or headlines, just two people realizing that love could not survive the pace of fame. Still, they remained professional. Night after night, they stood side by side on stage, singing songs about heartbreak to millions, pretending everything was fine. For Benny, the music became both a refuge and a mask, his piano letting him say what words could not. He would later confess that during those years, he often found himself watching Frida across the stage, remembering the nights they'd written songs together in small Swedish apartments, and wondering how something so beautiful had turned so heavy. By 1981, the magic that had once united ABBA was slipping away. The harmonies were still perfect, but the hearts behind them were no longer in sync. By 1981, ABBA's world looked polished from the outside. Gold records, sold-out shows, international fame. But behind the shimmering image, the foundation was crumbling. The band members were no longer the bright-eyed couples who sang about young love. They were weary adults trying to stay professional while their personal lives unraveled in public. When Benny Andersson and Frida Lyngstad announced their divorce, it did not shock fans the way Bjorn and Agnetha's had. It simply confirmed what everyone already sensed. The magic that had once bound ABBA together was fading into memory. Still, Benny was not ready to let go. He and Bjorn returned to the studio, determined to create something meaningful, one last statement. What came out of those sessions was The Visitors, released in late 1981, an album that sounded nothing like the cheerful pop that had made them stars. It was darker, more complex, filled with melancholy and reflection. Benny's piano was not playful anymore. It sounded haunted. Songs like One of Us and When All Is Said and Done carried the exhaustion of love that had run its course. Even the title track felt symbolic, a metaphor for strangers meeting in a house full of ghosts, echoing the band's own emotional distance. During recording, tension was thick but quiet. There were no screaming fights, no dramatic walkouts, just long silences and eyes that no longer met the same way. Agnetha often recorded her vocals alone, her voice trembling with emotion, while Frida's haunting tone added depth to the sadness already hanging in the room. Benny focused on the music, hiding his grief behind precision. He would later admit that writing and arranging during that period felt like the sound of an ending. When The Visitors finally released, critics praised its maturity, calling it ABBA's most sophisticated album. But commercially, it marked decline. The pop audience that once danced to Mamma Mia was not ready for introspection. The energy had shifted. ABBA's lighthearted sparkle had given way to something too human, too vulnerable. For Benny, though, that vulnerability was the point. It was his way of saying goodbye, not just to a band, but to an entire chapter of his life. In 1982, they regrouped briefly to record a few new songs for their compilation album, The Singles, the first 10 years. Among them was The Day Before You Came, a haunting, almost cinematic piece that captured the emptiness after love fades. The lyrics described the calm before an emotional storm, a reflection Benny knew all too well. When they performed together for the final time in December 1982, a televised appearance from Stockholm, there were smiles and laughter for the cameras, but something deeper lingered beneath. The four of them knew it was over. There was no official breakup announcement, no press conference, no farewell tour, just silence. One moment, they were the world's biggest pop group. The next, they were gone. For Benny, that silence became his refuge. He retreated from the spotlight, refusing to chase nostalgia or explain the split. When asked years later why ABBA ended, he would only say, "We simply stopped." But behind that quiet response was a lifetime of emotion, exhaustion, heartbreak, and the realization that even the greatest songs eventually reach their final note. When the lights dimmed and the final chords of ABBA faded, Benny Andersson did not vanish into the quiet. He retreated into creation. For a man who had spent decades expressing emotion through melody, silence was unbearable. In 1983, just months after ABBA's final performance, Benny married Mona Narklet, a Swedish TV producer who offered him something he had not known in years: stability. Their partnership was private, grounded, and away from camera. After the whirlwind of fame and heartbreak, Benny seemed to crave a normal life. Mornings at home, long walks, and a piano always waiting in the next room. Yet his creativity never rested. Alongside Bjorn Ulvaeus, his old songwriting partner and lifelong friend, Benny began crafting something more ambitious: a stage musical called Chess. Released in 1984, it was far from pop glamour. The story was complex, the music grand and orchestral. Songs like One Night in Bangkok and I Know Him So Well showed that Benny and Bjorn had evolved from hitmakers into serious composers. The project became a global success, earning critical acclaim and proving that the magic between the two men had not disappeared with ABBA. Meanwhile, the women of ABBA walked their own difficult paths. Agnetha Fältskog, once the golden voice of heartbreak, withdrew from public life. Her fear of flying, painful divorce, and years of constant attention had left her fragile. She moved deep into the Swedish countryside, seeking peace after a series of personal losses. The deaths of her parents left a deep scar, and her brief, troubled relationship with a fan who later stalked her only pushed her further into isolation. When she finally re-emerged with her 2004 album My Coloring Book, her voice was still hauntingly pure, but her eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen too much. Frida Lindstad rebuilt her life across borders. After leaving Sweden, she settled in Switzerland, far from the chaos of her ABBA years. In 1992, she married Prince Heinrich Rousseau Ripas von Plauen, becoming Princess Anne-Fried Ripas Froos. It sounded like a fairy tale ending, but tragedy soon struck again. Her beloved daughter, Lise Lott, was killed in a car accident in 1998, followed by her husband's death from cancer the following year. For most people, that would have broken something beyond repair, but Frida's faith carried her forward. She spoke later about finding comfort in spirituality and nature, learning to live quietly, not as a celebrity or princess, but as a survivor. Through it all, Benny and Bjorn continued writing musicals, film scores, and projects that would keep ABBA's spirit alive without reviving its name. Every few years, journalists would ask the same question: will ABBA ever reunite? Benny always smiled politely and said no plans, even as a small flicker in his eyes betrayed that he was not entirely sure. The truth was, time had softened the pain. The bitterness was gone, replaced by something gentler: respect, nostalgia, and a quiet understanding that what they had created was bigger than any one of them. In interviews, Benny often reflected on those years with a mix of pride and melancholy. He admitted that while fame never truly interested him, the music still haunted him. "I don't listen to our songs much," he once said, "but sometimes one comes on and I think, we did that?" It was not bad. It was a humble understatement from a man whose melodies had soundtracked millions of lives. It took almost 4 decades for the silence to break. For years, Benny Andersson had dismissed reunion rumors with a quiet laugh, saying the past should remain untouched. But in 2018, something changed. The 4 members, Benny, Bjorn, Agnetha, and Frida, found themselves back in a recording studio for the first time since 1982. What started as a plan to record 2 small songs soon became something much larger: ABBA's rebirth. It was not about chasing nostalgia or fame, it was about closure. For Benny, it was a chance to revisit the family he had built and lost through music, a final harmony after decades of separation. The result was Voyage, released in 2021, a record that felt like a time capsule and a confession all at once. Benny's piano carried the same warmth it had in the 1970s. But this time, the notes felt heavier, wise. The album's reflective tone, songs about aging, love, and memory, was not just for fans. It was Benny's letter to the past. "I Still Have Faith in You." The opening track was more than a song title. It was a message between 4 people who had lived through everything together and somehow found their way back. The voices of Agnetha and Frida, aged yet graceful, blended with Benny's chords like a reunion of souls. For listeners, it was emotional. For Benny, it was healing. But the story did not end with the album. In 2022, ABBA Voyage opened in London, an ambitious digital concert using lifelike avatars of their younger selves. Inside a custom-built arena, holographic versions of the band performed to roaring crowds, while the real Benny often watched quietly from the balcony, his face lit by the same lights that once shone on him half a century ago. It was not just a show, it was an echo of everything they had been. The project became one of the biggest live phenomena in modern music, a bridge between past and present that only ABBA could build. Then came May 27th, 2025, the night that turned nostalgia into something deeper. As the crowd filled the ABBA arena for the show's third anniversary, a murmur swept through the audience. Benny Andersson and Frida were there, in person, side by side for the first time in years. The moment they appeared, the audience erupted. Cameras flashed, and for a second it felt like time had folded in on itself. Frida, radiant in a cream outfit, smiled warmly at the crowd. "I love you very much," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's hard to imagine it's nearly 50 years ago." The room filled with applause, and she added with a laugh, "I'm turning 80 this year." Then Benny took the microphone. Everyone expected something sentimental, but instead he opened with, "Two men walk into a bar," a small joke that made Frida burst into laughter. The moment was simple, human, and unscripted. In that laughter, fans saw something more powerful than any performance. Decades of pain, distance, and history melted away in seconds. It was forgiveness disguised as humor, a private understanding made public for the first time. For those watching, it was not just nostalgia. It was closure. The boy who taught himself piano at 10, the man who once lost everything to fame, had finally come full circle. Benny had spent years letting his music speak for him. But that night, standing next to Frida, he said everything without saying a word. The applause lasted minutes, echoing through the arena like a promise that their story would never truly end. Now, as Benny approaches 80, he remains the soul of ABBA, the quiet composer whose melodies once made the world dance and whose silence made it listen. Looking back, he no longer sees heartbreak or failure. He sees a life told in music, a journey that began with an accordion and ended with immortality. Because for Benny Andersson, ABBA was never just a band. It was his family, his heartbreak, his redemption, and his confession, finally complete. So after everything, the fame, the heartbreak, and the years of silence, Benny Andersson finally let the world see what was left behind when the spotlight faded. Not bitterness, not regret, but love, the kind that survives decades, distance, and from the boy with the accordion to the man who reunited a global family through music, Benny's story is proof that time cannot destroy what was built from truth. But what do you think? Were ABBA's divorces the real reason the band fell apart? Or would their journey have ended the same way no matter what? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more untold stories from the golden age of music. Because some legends never fade. They just find a new way to sing.
And then what happens?
Sometimes you get lucky.